All right.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order our work session for Monday, July 8th, 2019.
Sorry.
Welcome.
Okay, yeah, jumped the gun there. Thanks, Mayor. Tonight's work session, we've asked the town's parking consultant, Jim Sherlier with Sherlier and Associates, to come and give a presentation, like a parking 101 presentation to the town board. It's good timing, we felt, because of the parking structure that's going to be provided in the Morgan Ranch FDP that the board's going to see later this year. And also, you'll see your first request for reimbursement or public eligibility for public funds for the medical office building parking garage. So that'll be in, here in an upcoming meeting that you'll receive that request, which requires board approval to be eligible for public financing for part of that parking garage. So we thought it'd be great for Jim to come and give you a presentation. And he's been involved in parking for quite some time, has great expertise, and has some great information for the board, and answer any questions you might have. With that, Jim?
Thank you. Good evening. I think I was here in 2016, and Mayor, I think you were the only surviving person.
Yes. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everybody see the screen okay? Okay. Okay. Oh, I have to, this is for the record. All right. All right, so we'll move quickly. You have a big evening ahead of you. This is intended to be a grounding and a backgrounding to put you in a position where you share some knowledge about parking strategy. It's not specifically about a specific project or a specific approval. Parking ends up being something we talk way more about than we'd like to most of the time. I was at a meeting talking about parking to a city council the other night, and somebody stood up after me and said, I wish we could take all the time we spend talking about parking and instead talk about something useful. And I actually agreed with him. So it's important for a town, a city, to be strategic about what you do with parking. Everybody's always unhappy about parking. Everybody always has their own facts. And so you have to be strategic and kind of know what it is you set out to do, and then go about doing what you set out to do. So it's like any complex management problem you might tackle in your regular jobs. So you want objectives and outcomes. You need actions that are strategically designed to achieve those outcomes, and you need to monitor and report and be transparent about it. These are things that cities and towns haven't done very well, but we're beginning to do better. So, your objectives are your objectives. I don't know what they are. Maybe something like strong retail sales, maybe vibrant character, maybe you count pedestrians. Maybe it's just something that you do with your store owners to determine how they're doing. Certainly one of your goals is to have enough parking. We'll talk about that in a second. And I'll talk about each of these strategic actions. So these are the kind of where the rubber hits the road. And then reporting and monitoring, which we don't do a very good job of in city government in this country or anywhere. But it's highly important. It really helps. It clears the air, puts you in a position where you can address tough issues without having to argue about the data. So the challenge of supply management, which is, we tend to only think about supply and not demand. The challenge with supply management is that not enough is a problem and too much is a problem. There's a target you want to hit. Parking shouldn't be as controversial as it is, but it can end up being pretty controversial. It's very expensive. It's one of your most important public assets. People get angry over a lot of things, not being able to find a parking space and so forth. And the super challenge, and this is especially relevant to town of Superior, is that the demand is going to change over time, and you can predict it. You can say, well, in 20 years, we're going to need this much supply, but you don't want to build that today, right? That's what Columbia, Missouri did with their White Elephant, which was financed with revenue bonds, and the city's had to back that garage ever since because the parking revenues don't come in. The place is rarely parked above the second floor. So timing's critical, and early's not necessarily good. But you need a plan. You need to know what that future supply is, and you need to know how you're going to step your way up there. And this is directly relevant, I think, to downtown Superior, obviously, and the plan for that. The parking, there's a plan for parking. but it doesn't all need to be there on day one. So how do you manage that over time? One of the key things to do, and I'm sure you've all read, things about this. You probably know about this to some degree, so I won't spend too much time on it. But shared parking is an extremely important way to save money and make parking work better. But it requires management. And here's the logic behind it. This is a typical accumulation. It's based on one of our projects a long time ago in Seattle, so I'm using 200 cars as the size of the graph, but you could put any numbers in there you wanted. But this is what the accumulation looks like. So at 1 a.m., most people are there, 90 cars. By the middle of the day, a lot of the cars are gone. Back in the evening, it steps back up to that full parking. This was in an urban situation. A typical accumulation of retail parking demand, these are parked cars, would look like this. A little bit of a surge at noon, early afternoon's pretty busy, late afternoon starts to pick up, and then you have kind of a peak maybe at 5 or 6 o'clock. This is maybe a suburban location. And if you stack those one on top of each other, which was traditionally what we've done, it gets to be very expensive. If you do, so in this example, which is again based on a real world case, the peak demand you would estimate you needed would be 185 cars, 185 spaces, even though you would never have that many cars present. So shared supply, you stack those by the hour of the day, and that requires data. You have to know what's going on. You have to have observed the accumulation and actually recorded it. But it saves a lot of money. 40 spaces would, be enough square footage for another 7 to 10 stores. You're saving a lot of money. So in a project, especially in a city that's growing and developing rapidly, these are important numbers. The restaurants are especially problematic when we're trying to do shared parking. Whenever we do a parking audit, and I'm going to talk about parking audits in a second, but whenever we do a parking audit for a city, if there's a destination restaurant, that's one of the most problematic land uses because they have they generate a lot of parking demand and it tends to be very peaky in nature. It occurs at a very specific time. McDonald's, not so much, but a destination restaurant, yes. So when you start stacking that with your retail, the shared parking doesn't work very well. So when you think about shared parking, sometimes you'll see cities write ordinances where they say 25%. Just cut 25% of your calculated demand. That's what it'll be due to shared parking. Well, that might work and it might not. So you need to pay attention to the specific of the uses and how they're stacking over the course of a day. Same thing when you stack restaurant with residential. My sister used to live on Old South Gaylord, and there's a number of, in that little business district down there, some of you may know it, there's a number of destination restaurants, and the residents would just go bonkers because the streets would be parked up with people going to those restaurants because the restaurants didn't have any parking of their own. So this is very different from what you did in Superior Marketplace, where every major store has its own parking pod, right? And it's not, they're not out there saying, oh, you went to TJ Maxx, you shouldn't have parked in the Costco parking lot. But still, as a practical matter, you've got about 2/3, a little more than that actually, of the land area is devoted to parking. So about 2 square feet of parking for every 1 square feet of revenue generating store. So that's Superior Marketplace. That's very different. This is an early drawing, I don't even know if this is still current, but an early depiction of the downtown where the uses are much closer together. You don't have giant surface supplies, and it's based on a shared parking model. Shared parking saves money. It encourages development because it lowers parking costs. It increases economic synergies. It generates business. I'm going to use Basalt, Willis Town Center as an example a couple of times today, and that place is booming and doing really well. In part because you got all this park once stuff going on. The residents are close to the stores. If you go to one store, it's easy to get to all the other stores. There are other things going on, and so the place is thriving. But you have to manage it. You can't just put it in place and walk away from it. You have to manage it. And the town is going to have to be involved in the management. The town is going to have to be directly involved in the management. Valet parking is a solution for destination restaurants. There are places that are busy enough, districts in some cities that are busy enough where valet valets parking is just kind of generally needed. I don't think you're going to get there anytime soon. But if you have a major destination restaurant that gets hot, you may be asked to. What are the rules for valeting at restaurants, for example? Turnover is really important. Every time I get called into a city and the city's saying we have a real parking problem on our downtown streets, and I start looking at, and what I find are employees parked in front of the stores where they work, and the assistant manager of the store is parked in that. And so turnover is important. We usually would help a client in that kind of a situation set some criteria for counting and observing and measuring and seeing how they're doing with turnover. How many vehicles per day do you get out of each space? What's the turnover rate? What's the average duration? So forth. Those are all arithmetically interrelated, obviously. And they're different for convenience on street and for general on street and for off-street surface. Typically, obviously, you try to put your longer term parking, your employee parking and so forth in surface lots as opposed to in your premium storefront parking. Commercial districts can be successful or unsuccessful. The successful ones are busy. There's a lot of social interaction. The parking tends to be fairly full, and they tend to have time limits on parking to avoid abuse of the best parking by employees and commuters and so forth. Unsuccessful places tend to be slow, have very little social interaction, plenty of parking available, and no time limits. There's a perception that success in parking is we have no controversy, and that doesn't work that way. Parking is always controversial. People always complain about parking. You'll never be in a situation where people don't complain about parking. And you will hear from now on, electeds sitting at your table there, will hear this from now on, that there's a problem with parking in downtown Superior. That's not because there's a problem. It's because people have perceptions and expectations that aren't being met. And you all know the story. You know, if you can't park immediately in front of the storefront you want to go into, then there's something wrong with the system. If I have to park a block away, our blood pressure goes up immediately if we don't see a parking space right where we want one. Time limits are really important, and it's important to be strategic with them. You don't want 2 hour, you want to push your longer term parking farther out, but you have to realize that somebody who wants to go have lunch and do some shopping is going to be there 3 hours or maybe even 4 hours. And you want that. The longer they stay, the more they spend, and the better off it is for the district and for the town. But that takes you immediately into enforcement. My general rule would be, don't have rules you don't plan to enforce. It engenders public disrespect for what you're doing and hurts your credibility. Plus, it doesn't work. There are two enforcement business models that towns use. The punitive model, which is, it's law enforcement, it's punishment. Why did you do something wrong? Here's a fine. And then more of a service-oriented approach. And the service-oriented approach, it's not rocket science, but you have to think about it a little bit and you have to plan for it. Some communities would, for example, on first offense, would, instead of giving a ticket, a $25 fine or whatever, they would give a coupon for 10% off at area stores, and it would say on there, did you know that you overparked your time, and did you know we have parking time limits, but we realize this is your first time, and so here's 10% off at the area stores. And it softens that impact, and because merchants worry about parking enforcement because they're afraid you're going to run your customers off. I always say, well, your bigger problem is, that your parking spaces are being used for something other than customers. So enforcement needs to be friendly. It needs to be yes.
May I ask a question about that last one? Yes. With those coupons, are those typically handed out still by police officers? Who are
No, I'm going to come to that in a second.
Okay, sorry, continue.
That's very perceptive, though, because that is a key issue. Friendly, inevitable, technological. So this is not really where we are anymore. This is where we are. First of all, we're using technology. It saves time, saves money, gives us the ability to see where we've got scofflaws. If you're chalking tires, and nobody I can't, there hardly anybody chalks tires anymore. But if you chalk tires, you don't know who that car is. And that car could be doing that every day, and the tickets be going in the back seat. And I've known people who do that. So you need to know who the scofflaws are, and you need to have an escalating fine system, and you need technology to do that. You can't do that just with chalk and a paper and a pen. So we would recommend generally, and I don't want to get into local politics here. I don't know anything about. I think you use Boulder County sheriffs for your law enforcement, so maybe they could care less. I don't know. I mean, they care, but I mean, maybe they don't really want the parking assignment in the first place. It's better not to do parking with law enforcement. It's, you know, some of you have been in downtown Boulder. You've seen the people with the khaki shorts and the little blue shirts, and that's who's doing the ticketing there. And then there are also ambassadors. Downtown Phoenix has done this. The parking enforcement people actually have a thing that says, I'm a downtown ambassador, and they're actually talking with people and trying to help. That's a much better model than law enforcement. A lot of people go through life without having an encounter with a law enforcement officer that's, you know, on the unfriendly side. And it means a lot to them. And so it's a big step to step away from that. Event management matters and is important. Small events like, say, a farmer's market, and big events like the film festival in Park City. And you use, you know, the important thing is that you have to anticipate, you have to know what the schedule is, and you have to be involved in managing that. Now, the Metro District can take the lead on that, but the town is going to need to be pretty directly involved in that. And there are going to be issues. Some of these events can anger merchants because they feel like they actually make less money during events than they do on a regular day. Communication matters. We just put parking out there, walk away from it, and expect it to work. We have to communicate continuously with the public. This is not how we do it anymore. And it's important to take advantage of the technologies we have. And this can be all different kinds of things. I would say very few cities actually do a good job of this, but we have the tools we need. In fact, we have apps available now, and some of you, probably all of you, have at least one of these on your phone, that enables us to see where the spaces are, figure out how long we can park there, what the parking price is. As we walk away, if we get a long lunch going, we can add to our time, or we can pay our fees and our fines and so forth. So this is where we're headed, and this is where you'll need to be as a modern, growing young city. The technology can be complicated and really full service, where you've got sensors in the road and all of this kind of stuff, or it can be simple. Downtown Omaha, for example, I've been spending quite a bit of time there. They have an app that you can use to pay for your parking meter, to actually pay your fee to park there, but it doesn't have a locator in the street. So there are all levels of technical sophistication that can be brought to bear on this. And monitoring and reporting matters a lot. You need to be able to say, when somebody comes in and says, blah, 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 you need to be able to say, well, actually, we have the data, and here's what the data shows. So this is our parking audit of Willits Town Center in Basalt. Highly successful, about half the size built out as your downtown will be, but a pretty busy place, and very successful right now. We did the transportation planning there, and I was called back 18 years later to do a parking audit. And the parking audit shows what the actual parking accumulation is overall. Sure, there are some block faces that are full. That means there's some businesses that are doing well. But could you find parking a block or two away? Yes. And that's important to know, because then you can have a frank conversation about, well, what do we need to do to make it so that you're willing to walk a block or half a block to get a parking space? It requires a partnership, an ongoing partnership. You have to really take care of that. You have to keep it alive, be involved in it. You need to know what your parking inventory is. You need to have it mapped. You need to have it classified, who owns it, who's it to be used for. Is it on street? Is it off street? You need to know how full it gets. When does it get full? When we do our audits, and I'm recommending you do an audit at least during the construction years here, maybe as often as once a year. We do Thursday, Friday, Saturday in a busy season. We don't count during special events, because special events are special and they have to be specially managed. We do hourly counts, and we will do some sampling so that we can estimate turnover. Here's the Willits Town Center inventory. It's pretty simple stuff. It fits in a spreadsheet, usually match it up with a map. I wanted them to put it in GIS, but they didn't have the budget and couldn't do it, so we just did physical maps. Here's an accumulation Friday afternoon, busy season, 1 p.m. nice day, August. And as you can see, there were some block faces that were parked up. Oh, this is upside down. So for example, this is full, right in front of the Starbucks is full. So, but a block away, no problem, plenty of parking, right? Well, in Basalt, they're having a debate about this because the people who have tried to park where it says 10 there, right here, were complaining that there's not enough parking in Volus Town Center. Well, there is enough parking in Volus Town Center. There just wasn't parking right in front of the storefront where you wanted to park. And that's important to know and to be able to say and to have the data. And then have the analysis of what's working and what do we need to do next? Are we, is there an issue we're going to have to address together? They had thought the Whole Foods would consume all of the parking in the Whole Foods lot and overflow into some of the side lots, and it hasn't done that. It's doing well as a store, but it hasn't done that. And then the minimum accessibility requirements for ADA and accessible parking are really important. You have to kind of monitor what's going on with that as well. There are a couple topics I didn't want to spend much time on because I don't think they're not here yet. They're not immediate business for you. One of them is paid parking. And paid parking, the entire city council of Park City, Utah got unelected after they implemented paid parking in their downtown. So I think everybody but the mayor and one council member got unelected in Aspen when they did that. So it's a controversial thing. People get up in arms and they're angry. And you could say, well, why should you have free parking? But it's a conversation that can be long and difficult. But I don't think paid parking is going to be a management technique you need anytime when we're going to be talking. Maybe someday if the place is really successful and fills up and it's just booming and you just can't get a parking space there, typically you end up doing paid parking for your on-street spaces. And if you do paid parking for on-street spaces, you pretty much have to do it for any garages as well, because otherwise, it doesn't work. If you can park free in the garage and you have to pay to park in the street, aside from being backwards. And then there's this whole question about what are all these trends we read about in the newspaper, ride hailing, car share, and all of that. And those are impacting parking demand, there's no question. We're in a time when doing public financing to build a parking garage would be a little bit on the risky side because we don't know exactly what is going to happen. We know that Uber and Lyft are having an impact on commercial parking demand. So if my wife and I live in West Highlands, we go downtown Denver sometimes, we would never drive to downtown Denver. And so we've got transit, we've got Uber, we use Lyft, and we can get down there. It's cheaper than parking, and so and it's easier, and it's not as stressful and not as dangerous. So it is having, these ride-hailing services are having an effect on commercial parking demand, but they're not making money, and they could go away. Those companies are losing money hand over fist. They're doing the Amazon thing. They're being financed by stockholders who believe that eventually they'll dominate the market and make money, even though they're not making money yet. And then the car share membership does have a pretty big impact on residential parking demand, but we're not going to see a lot of car share membership in Superior, downtown Superior, I don't think, in that residential. Just given the market, 3 and 4 story, really nice brand new units. That's not your market for car share. Car share is apartments in the dense downtown. But they do have an impact, and they could have more of an impact in the future. If we do, but those things I think are a ways off. I think we want to pay attention to them, watch what's happening. Uber and Lyft are both here. They're both operating in Superior. But they're not having a big demand yet, but they could have in the future. So those are some things to think about down the road. I don't think they're things we need to deal with right away. And then we have time for questions, right?
Okay, good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from the board?
So we were chatting a little bit about the car sharing and ride sharing services. Are you also not anticipating an impact from self-driving cars?
Well, So I didn't include the graph in here that shows what the rollout will be for fully autonomous vehicles. It's probably about a 30-year process, and we're not going to see any significant percentage of genuinely autonomous cars anytime soon. The impact, there's two impacts. One, autonomous vehicles, semi-autonomous vehicles, and autonomous vehicles are more expensive, so they discourage car ownership a little bit. Right now is no problem because only the high end of the market is even paying attention to that. The other impact is that if eventually we do get taxis, ride-hailing services that are using AV vehicles and they manage somehow to find a business model and they can make money, which is a big question mark right now. But if they did, we could see a big drop in personal car ownership.
Right, yeah, and that's what I'm thinking of, because I know that stat that's being floated is that 75% of cars will be self-driving by 2040.
By 20, and that's, I think, an oversight. It's going to be closer to 2050, but yeah.
Okay.
Something like that will happen eventually, which is why, like 30-year bonds, on a giant white elephant parking garage in downtown Columbia might not have been the best idea. But other questions?
So when we go back to then your projections that, now I can't remember if they were earlier in the presentation, but I was looking through it in advance, your numbers don't take any sort of decline into account. It's purely based on population growth at this point?
Well, I haven't done any forecasting for Superior.
What am I thinking of? I thought
You might be looking at the actual development plan or the shared parking calculation. And
I thought I reviewed it in the materials.
so in your, and I should have said that, I didn't, in your plan unit development approval for what's downtown Superior, there are shared parking calculations and there are parking criteria that they are using and adhering to. And one of the questions you will be asking eventually is, are those working right? Is that actually close to what actual demand is? I've reviewed what was in your approval of the development and in the original parking ratios and the shared parking calculations, and they're pretty good. I didn't see anything in there that worried me. When you think about that project, the developer would not want a parking shortage either. So
right.
Sometimes you get an infill project in a downtown, you get really aggressive assumptions on shared parking and transit mode share and all of that stuff. But that wasn't a problem with that. I think where your starting point is solid. The challenge will be, can we implement that plan? Can we build that parking as we go along? What's the timing versus the development planning and all of that? That's going to be one of the bigger challenges, I think.
Okay. And then also with regard to the ambassador program that you had mentioned in downtown Phoenix, I was trying to do a little bit of research into that. I really like that idea for Superior. Is that program, is it a fully paid full-time roles for those ambassadors?
Oh yeah, they're staff positions. Now, a better example for you would actually be, and I know nobody wants to be Boulder, but you should, compare, and if you want, maybe I could help do that, but compare notes with what Boulder decided, because they went through that decision process. They used to enforce with police officers, and they decided not to do that. They now have a department of the city that's called Office of Transportation and Parking Services, and that's who those people work for. Okay. Now, they may do other things too. It's been a while since I've been up there and talked to them, but they have people who go out and they don't wear uniforms, but they all wear the same outfit, and so you can tell who they are. And they have a little thing that says something that sounds friendlier than police officer. Yeah. And they don't carry guns.
Okay.
Ken.
Thank you for joining us tonight and helping us help educate us on the topic. Going back to roughly about the middle of your deck when you were talking about the shared supply concepts, and you gave us the different models for retail, residence, and restaurant accumulation. Right. Clearly, the peak problem hours are going to be roughly like about 5 to 9.
Usually in a mixed-use center, yes.
Yeah. What types of solutions are you seeing towns and cities utilize to help with that problem?
Well, all right. So one of the things that we'll see, where you see, one of the real challenges comes where you have residential mixed in with commercial, right? First of all, everybody gets grouchy right away, so the tempers are short. but secondly, it's because, you know, the townhome may have 2 parking spaces allocated to it, and it may have some on-street, you know, in a garage, it may have some on-street parking out in front. But they may have a boat, or they may have somebody doing some work, and they've got a trailer. So when you get in residential areas, you find vehicles that are parked out there for weeks at a time. In Basalt, in Willits, we had people who had, you know, just almost like a storage unit was in a parking space, right? They had a trailer and they just were storing stuff in there because they didn't have room for it in the condo. Duration and turnover and parking time limits matter a lot. Our recommendation to Basalt was to go with no overnight parking on street. That has not been adopted yet, by the way. So another thing that happens is your employees are parking in that key space that you need when all the restaurant people are there. You still got your employees are parked out there. So time limits can help a lot. It also, and I should have mentioned this earlier, you know, Superior has, in all of the things you've done in recent years, worked from a demand management perspective. You had a demand management study done for you. You've got that information. And we do need to manage demand, and you can do that in here. Your employees should have access to eco-passes if you can get there. That's what they do in downtown Boulder, for example, downtown Denver. And you can do that at a district level. The entire CAGID in Boulder has, when my company was based in downtown Boulder, we didn't pay for it. We just had eco-passes. And we just had to go down and get our picture taken, and we got an eco-pass. But the property taxes we were paying was covering the cost of that district-wide. So other things are, with respect to restaurants, if it just gets too controversial, and it takes a popular restaurant to do this, but destination restaurants are good business. You may have to work with them and help them valet, and there are all kinds of issues that come up with valeting. Can you use public parking for valeting, right? Can you take this person's car and put it in a public space? Maybe that space was for somebody else. How do you manage that? Do you ask them to get a permit to do valet parking? There are questions that will come up at that stage. Those are probably primarily the things that you'll want to wrestle with. That early evening to mid-evening is probably going to be the most problematic time.
Okay, and I appreciate the answer. If you scroll down to the picture that you have of our town center, that's actually a specific area that I'm most concerned with, and it has basically all the features that you mentioned that are problematic. Plus, we have the sports stable anchoring us.
Special events.
Exactly. Yeah. So the solution that I really heard was managing time.
Well, yes, and sticking to your plan. I mean, your plan looks to me now. I know you have a process coming up that none of us can comment on, and I haven't really paid any attention to it yet. But this plan, and the development approval works. I think that'll work. So where towns and cities go wrong often is they don't follow their own plan. You know, somebody comes in and says, oh, could we wait a while? We really don't want to build this yet. And so you don't, and that becomes precedent. And so I would say stick to your plan. You'll be okay.
So how do you, I mean, let's assume our plan says only 1 hour, 2 hour, 30-minute parking, whatever it is right there. If we're going to do free parking, how do we utilize, say, some of that app-based technology to enforce that, or are we?
Well, the first thing to So, well, there's two parts of that equation that need access to technology. The first is law enforcement, right? Mm-hmm. And the important thing to do there, and you're going to probably ask a question here in a minute, but I'll wait and let you ask it. But the first thing to do here is to make sure that you have a database that the offenses are going into, the fines, the license numbers, and all of that. So you know who the scofflaws are.
Right.
Without a scofflaw database, you're a helpless victim. You really can't. So you need to do that. You'll have a conversation about fines and how much should they be and how much should they escalate. So you'll have to wrestle with that. The technology is really important because I I used to have an office in downtown Boulder, and we could look out our window, and there was a coffee shop across the street, and the people working in that coffee shop would come outside, smoke a cigarette, move the car 3 spaces over, and go back in because they had their tires stuck. Now, technology solves that problem. And you could even do sub-districts in here and enforce your parking that way. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. But so law enforcement needs basic technology. You don't even really have to buy it if you don't want to. There are companies that will come out and lease the equipment to you and process the fines for you and everything. I don't necessarily recommend that, but there's a lot of ways you can do that. So the law enforcement needs technology. And then the traveling public appreciates technology. You know, I like to stay at the Magnolia Hotel in downtown Omaha. I don't carry enough quarters to plug the meter to park overnight there, but I can get on the app, Park Omaha app, and I can buy that space and I can buy it overnight, and I'm good. And that makes it easy. That encourages me to stay at that hotel because I could go stay in the Element up in Midtown, and they have their own parking in a parking garage. So.
Right. But if we take the approach of not charging for parking, that eliminates the app-based user-friendly.
Not necessarily. I mean, time limits matter too. And so you're going to, paid parking brings a whole new layer of complexity to everything. But time limits require enforcement, and they require payment of fines, and they require that you know who's exceeded the time limit and so forth. So you need the technology for time limits as well.
But it's technology the enforcement is using, not the...
Yeah, I think so. If you were going to require that sensors be embedded in the pavement, it would have been, should have probably done that.
Already.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Before that. And I think you're going to be okay. I really think that with the shared parking model and implementation of reasonably light touch regulations, I think you'll be okay. The special events are going to be probably the most problematic thing.
Okay.
You get a big hockey tournament or meet or whatever they call it in hockey. You get something like that going on, and it's going to flood all the parking. Merchants are going to go nuts. They're going to come talking to you. They're going to say, city council, town council, you've got to fix this. So that, I think, will be that's where you're going to want to really, has all the parking that was originally planned for that been built? Is that being used? Do we use the medical office building parking for some overflow? What are the terms for that? There's some questions to be answered. I think you can handle it, but you're going to want to be on top of it.
Okay. And then one final question. You, early in the presentation, you showed the graph of supply and demand, and ultimately you don't want to give all your supply up front. Otherwise you get the elephant.
Yeah, you have to time things, right.
So looking at what we're building over in downtown Superior, where everything in theory is going to be built within 3, 4, or 5 years, and not a lot of extra space left over. How do you manage that growth? How are you able to continue to grow?
Well, I think you need to do it. I mean, I hope this is okay. I think you need to audit it once a year, at least, maybe even more often than that. You need to count spaces. You need to count your inventory. You need to keep up with it. And you need to kind of have an ear to the ground of what, as you start getting storefront businesses, what are they saying? Do they feel like they have a parking problem? What's going on? You have to kind of be on top of it, because you don't want to be in a situation where I showed you the two angry guys shouting at each other. You don't want to be in a situation where that's going on at council. You want to be in a position where you know what's going on, and they think they know what's going on.
So do you typically see in situations like ours, parking going vertical then, where there's a limited amount of space? Or? Well,
the planning I've seen so far has one garage in it. Now, I actually don't know what you're going to see in your current review process, but it's always a problem when you're staging. We have this problem in Willits Town Center. When you're staging, you're still building, but you're occupying. And for example, you have construction crews, you have the vehicles coming and going with products on them and so forth. So it's always a challenge. You're going to park in some places that are going to be buildings, and then there are going to be buildings there, and then you're going to move the parking somewhere else. Eventually, you're going to need some of those far out surface lots. You're going to need the garages. So yes, I would say it's a rapid build out. You're going to want to stay on top of it, and kind of update your data as frequently as you can.
Thank you.
Based on your earlier comments around complaints, are business owners typically happy to talk to the council about it, or is that something you think we need to go through a Chamber of Commerce to get their true opinions?
Well, I don't know the specifics in Superior. I would say that merchants are challenging to work with, and I've worked in 1,000,000 downtowns, okay? Or 1,000 or something. But the merchants don't have time to come to meetings. They only come when they're angry, right? So it's hard to work with them. So having some sort of an organization that you can work with is helpful, because merchants are busy. I mean, it's a hard job. Retail's tough, and they don't have time to come to meetings.
So first, thank you for coming. Handful of questions or comments. There's kind of a good news, bad news thing here for me. The good news is, in my perspective, I think your estimates of the shared economy are not as maybe aggressive, more conservative than my estimates are.
Yeah.
I do think that we'll see a lot more. I don't know about autonomous vehicles, but I think we'll see a lot more sharing of the vehicles. And right now you have people that are choosing to be Uber or Lyft drivers. And I think you'll have more people, just as cars get more expensive, say, sure, there's the place, I forget what it's called, but
I look forward to continuing this conversation. Right. I don't know how it's going to turn out.
But we're in a pickle here, right? Because we need to make, to your point, we need to have a plan.
Well, we're assuming traditional demand.
Right.
So that's all upside potential on your part.
So I do think, I've been to the Willett Center a number of times, and I think it's just on my way into Aspen.
Sure.
And stopped at that Whole Foods. I think it's a good example. My problem with this, if you compare, I'd like you to pull up 3 graphs and let's see how you could do it. I'd like you to look at three overheads. I'd like to look at the overhead first for the Target and Costco area, which is, and estimate approximately what that ratio is to commercial space versus surface parking.
It was probably close to 6-to-1, right? Yeah.
Right, 6-to-1. And then what do you think Willett's is in terms of? Well,
Willett's is way less than that.
Yeah, I was clear. I'm looking at it.
It's like, I want to say it's complicated because the whole thing is one parking pool.
Right.
And the only parking that anybody actually owns is the parking the residences own underneath the buildings.
Yeah, I have gotten sideways glances because I've spent an hour or two there, and I actually have driven from point A to point B. So in the same shared parking garage. So the
underneath the Whole Foods.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a whole story in itself. But your question is?
Well, so if we're roughly 6-to-1 in the Target Costco area, yeah. Willett's is probably closer to, I'm going to say 1-to-1.
No. It's more like 2-to-1, and even 2.5. It depends on. So like any town, they've made some decisions. So they allowed the element to they agreed with the element that they could have exclusive use of some of the on-street parking. Right. Because the site for the element was small, right next to the highway, as you know. Right. And so there have been some things that have happened that sort of where they're moving away from that original formula.
Right. So now when you pull up the graphic let's go back to the graphic and your plan is a little old, but it's not that old. It's only a couple months old.
For Willett's?
For downtown Superior.
Oh, okay.
So I know you haven't done this analysis.
No, not
but
yet.
This is not.
I looked at the table that was in the original PUD.
So I get the tape. So understand what we're looking at, just to give you a little inside baseball, and what we're looking at is everything inside the red dash, right? So when you say, hey, I've looked at that table and everything looks good, there's a lot of concerns from the community and from this board and from previous board members that this does not look good. Not only because of the events that are planned at the sports stable, and if they have a hockey tournament, that's a problem. But the sports stable has, anywhere between 10 and 15 or 20 different businesses, right? Yeah. And it's busy, but it's not busy enough. I think if you surveyed each one of those businesses, they'd say, we want more traffic. Okay. They want more people. And there's no businesses on Main Street. We have no events or concerts in that nice little green area across there. And so that if you're saying, well, gee, this doesn't look bad, and you're looking at the areas outside of the red dotted line, including that shared parking garage in the northwest quadrant, that shared parking garage is not going to be here anytime in the next 4 to 5 years, unless something really impressive happens. That shared parking garage is 5, 6, 7 years out. Does this still look okay to you? And I know you haven't done a detailed assessment, but when I look at Willett's, and I'm looking at a graphic on my own computer, and I look at, target clearly as too much. I mean, the pendulum has swung too far the opposite direction.
It could be. And you may not agree with this either, and that's fine. It's a discussion always. But I would say that cities tend to err on the side of too much parking. You don't want the complaints you get. You worry about the business impacts. But if you actually look at over time what has happened in suburban places across the country, we've erred on the side of too much parking, not too little. You can get in a situation, some of the little business districts in Denver, downtown Boulder, you can get in a situation where parking is really, really squeaky tight and it becomes controversial and you have to start doing other things. In my opinion, you could get there, but I don't think you're going to get there soon. And you said the parking garage is going to happen. Well, that's part of my point too.
Well, it's going to happen. It's not going to. My point was, it's not going to happen for a long, long time.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I understood that. And so, what's the phasing of the parking supply, and is it keeping up with the parking demand? I think that's going to be a continual conversation on the part of the city. I'm not sure. Are you thinking that there would be things you might do now to sort of feed more parking supply into the planning process?
I'm very concerned about the lack of parking here, and I'm eager, and I know this was a parking 101 and not a site assessment for this particular site.
Right.
But I have extreme concerns around the lack of parking and the uniqueness to this facility, to this location. I think it's unique for a number of reasons. Number one, to your good point earlier, it's hockey. This isn't a gym where somebody's got, a light gym bag that they're going. They're carrying, and oftentimes it's the moms carrying a 25, 30-pound gym bag, hockey bag for their kids. They do not want to walk
1,000 feet.
3 blocks. Right. And so it doesn't matter what a sign's going to say. Right. They're not taking a bus. Right. They're not taking a shuttle bus, and they're just not going to go. So
I think you'll have this conversation going forward pretty much steadily for the next few years. And there will be different points of view, and it's important.
So when do you usually engage? When did you engage with Will? I want to be cautious of the time.
Okay. So I did the original transportation planning back in 98 and 99. And they didn't ask me back until 2017 to do an audit, a parking audit. And the parking audit was that data I showed you earlier, which showed that the system was working pretty well.
So you did the 99, so Willits didn't start the build out until 2000.
Well, they were, not much there happened there for a while, until the economy came back, and then they took off.
Okay. In your experience, I said that was my last question, but I'm going to cheat. In your experience, this is not a town development. I'd recommend that I like you as a consultant. I think you have great experience. I'd like Ranch Capital, you to be on the dime of Ranch Capital. I'd like to hear from you again, paid for by Ranch Capital. Thank you.
So, you want to go, Clint? Yeah. So, could you bring back the map of downtown Superior, please?
Sure. And again, let me just emphasize that I don't know for sure that this is the current.
Right, right. It's not, and I want to point out a couple things. Without getting into the discussion as to the downtown development plans that we're actually going to be considering in the fall, Kevin raised a really good point about, this is a 640 space parking structure that we have really no idea when, if ever, that's going to get built. The plan that's being presented right now is contemplating some structured parking in here. We don't know how many spaces, but that's kind of the latest incarnation of what the plan is going to look like. And then, the other thing that concerns me, and I think this is just kind of the practical reality, people are going to park where it's the most convenient for them to park, right? They're going to park wherever they're going to go. They're going to try to park there, right? And right now we have a lot of traffic coming up and down McCassin, heading down Main Street and heading to the sports stable, right? We've got a lot over here that is pretty full, but it's not necessarily the most convenient place for people to park. We've got structured parking over here that is, attached to the medical office building, is not necessarily top of mind when people are coming to downtown Superior. So what you're finding right now is, Main Street is completely parked up with, hockey moms and dads. It's busy. Now, it doesn't make a difference right now because we don't have any businesses there that are, suffering the negative consequences of having all their storefronts parked up. But if and when we do have businesses there, we need to do something to direct the hockey traffic, because, there are people who are dropping off their kids, here in this little roundabout here. But then there are the people that are actually staying, for several hours. And this isn't just a 45-minute, 1 hour trip. This is a, several hour duration. We're going to need to have, the advice as to how to best manage Main Street, because we're going to want to activate Main Street.
Yes, you are.
And we don't want it parked up with hockey traffic.
Right. That's true. I agree with everything you just said. And so that's what I call storefront parking. Storefronts need storefront parking. They need that to turn over quickly. So you're going to need time limits in that. And you're going to have to enforce them.
And your recommendation as to the best way to do that is with the incentivized, your first warning here, 10% off, go to, this coffee shop next time?
I mean, all that does is soften the impact for people who didn't know what, so you bring in your kid for hockey, you think, I can get away with parking here just at one time, and you get this ticket, and you're like, boy, I'm never coming here again. But if it's the coupon thing, maybe you don't get it. It's something that merchants like because it softens the impact.
So this will be my last question, but I'll echo what Kevin said. I'd love to hear your opinion as to, once we're seeing the actual the actual development plans for downtown here, with this parking structure, not taking into consideration this structure as the answer to all of our problems, because I don't think it is, because people aren't going to be lugging their hockey bags, 3 blocks this way, 1 block that way, 3 blocks that way to get to the sports stable. They're still going to want to park over here. They're going to want to park over here, maybe. They're going to want to park over here. Once we see this parking structure, and without assuming that this is happening, I'd like your opinion as to what is the lay of the land in terms of our parking supply and our parking needs, and what we need to do in terms of enforcing to really activate the downtown commercial core area here.
Okay. But my question for you would be, if the development approval has parking in it and minimum ratios that they committed to and you committed to, why are you saying that some of the parking shown on this drawing would not be built?
Well, I mean, I don't believe anything until it's actually in front of us and approved.
Just natural.
I mean, there's consequences with the economics of things, and until things are actually built, they're not built.
So the way to deal with that, we've been through that a few times, would be to develop triggers for when additional parking supply is required, including perhaps a major structure.
Yep. Sandy, you're good. Okay. I had a question about connectivity to the bus rapid transit facility that's at McCaslin here. We've got great connectivity to Boulder, Denver with bus rapid transit.
Right.
However, just the physical distance between downtown and that bus rapid transit is just long. It's not walkable on a regular basis, particularly if weather is involved. So how do we best utilize transit back and forth for employees, which would help with parking, and for residents that are wanting to come and go to work and not have to be a part of the traffic equation coming in and out of there.
If I can do a sales pitch, I would love to help you with that. I think that there are some cool things you could think about doing. Flatiron Crossing hasn't been as successful as I wanted them to be. We did the transportation planning for that as well. And that connection isn't as strong as it was supposed to be. Really strong when the ZIP was still running. But it may be that, maybe you get an Easy 10 AV autonomous shuttle in here and pave a little road and run people back and forth with that. Maybe there are other things you could do. Bike share certainly could be part of the solution. I think that's a fascinating question. It's an important one. I think it's worth some attention.
Okay, good. Final thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I'll just answer you asked a good question, Mark, if the original design guidelines have parking ratios. This is a lot more, the residential came up a lot faster than any commercial. When you go back and read and watch all those videos from 2012, 2013, and the residential parking rates are being met. The commercial, we haven't seen anything, and I have tremendous skepticism that there's going to be sufficient parking for the community events that will be held there. So I think there is sufficient parking for the residences, and, you know, they're meeting those requirements.
Right.
Minimally meeting those requirements.
Right.
And then unfortunately, people still have 2 or 3 cars. I wish they didn't.
Yeah.
But people still have 2 or 3 cars, and so people are going to park on the street.
So this is why I titled this strategic management. You really are going to have to manage this, and you're going to have to be on top of it. You're going to have your own opinion about what's going on and whether it's what was agreed to or not. And you're going to have to manage it. It's going to be a big, busy, successful, mixed-use commercial center. It's not going to take care of itself. It's going to take some
hopefully Matt will relay to Ranch Capital how much I like you, and Ranch Capital will get you on the payroll real soon, because I'm going to be beating them up pretty hard over parking in a couple months.
While I'm on TV, let me just say there are a lot of really good parking consultants in the Denver region, so
okay.
You know, I'm not the only choice.
Good.
All right, anyone else? Okay, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll adjourn the work session and be back at 7 o'clock.